Did you hypothesize on the mechanism or medium through which that communication from these actuality occurs, since we're talking beyond physics anyway? Are we looking at like a morphogenetic field like Sheldrake talks about, or is it a consciousness field, if such a thing exists?
Well, I guess what I want to say is that the ability of actual occasions to influence the aim of lower grade occasions is a metaphysical primitive. It's just the way it is. I wouldn't want to, I'm not going to try to explain it in terms of physics, because I'm trying to explain physics in terms of this, right? And so, and I think the morphogenetic idea is really interesting and might be useful in this context, but this particular thing is not a morphogenetic relationship. It's sui generis. See, I'm suggesting that there is, in reality, the capacity of higher grade occasions to influence the aims of lower grade occasions. It's just a causal, primitive causal relationship. I'm not going to try to explain it in terms of anything else. I'm going to try to explain other things in terms of this. Any scheme of explanation has to assume something. I'm assuming this. And as we'll see, I don't know what the limits of this are. So, for example, we talked yesterday about macro psychokinesis, about the capacity of a human being to make a table lift up in the air. And we're assuming that's possible. Right? Now, the only way that's possible, right now science can't explain it at all. I'm suggesting that that an adequately structured human being can influence the aim of the molecules making up the table so that they can exploit the very remote quantum probability that they can levitate, and they'll do it. What are the limits of that? I don't know. If people can make a table raise up off the floor, they can defy gravity this way, what are the limits? Clearly we do it in our bodies, but what are the limits? I don't know what mediates this, and I'm suggesting that this is we just take this as primitive. And so, it's an interesting question. We could talk about it more, but basically, I don't want to interpret it in something else. I want to interpret other things in terms of this.
There is a notion, a friend of mine is a physicist, but a non-traditional physicist, developing a mathematically based, what he calls the physics of light. And he calls it the biophysics of the quantum plenum, on a foundational basis that space is not empty. Calls it the plenum of space, not a vacuum of space. And that every point in space is infinite energy. And it actually is very consistent with what you're talking about here.
Yes and no. You see, because this is hard to communicate, but he's assuming that there's space, which is something out there, and that space is possessed of energy, which is something out there, and that somehow this plenum of space produces events.
No? That's kind of extending the physics model to the way he's talking about it.
Yeah.
But
what I would suggest is that as an actual occasion, I take in the entirety of my past. Now, let's get really sophomoric about this for a minute, okay? From a certain point of view, you only know about the world from your experience. And so the world that you know is the world in your experience. So there's a certain way in which each one of us can say, I contain the world. I'm in the mathematical center of the world, as I said before, and I contain it. The world exists in my experience. The way that I'm speaking takes that really seriously, right? I contain the entire universe, including you, as of a second ago. You contain the whole world, including me, as of a second ago. That's all there is, right? Actuality is contained in experience. Experience is not contained in anything. The space of experience is all the space there is. As Whitehead says, outside of experience there is nothing, mere nothing. So there's no space apart from experience, no space apart from consciousness, no space apart from aim. That's it. Right? So we can't talk about space as a precondition for actuality, because actuality is all the space there is. Make any sense? Yeah, so I usually find that I differ with people who are constructing physics models, and this understanding of space is different.
Taking experience as the basis, then Whitehead would definitely be categorized as a pan-experientialist?
Yes.
What is the difference between a pan-experientialist and panpsychism?
Nothing, it's just terminology.
Nothing, it's just terminology.
You know, there's in the conventional science of mind, the big debate is everything matter? Is everything mind? Or do they both exist? And then there's a fourth position, which is called the panpsychist or the pan-experientialist position, which is what I'm presenting. And that position is that they're never separate, is that without mind there is no matter, and without matter there is no mind. And that's called panpsychism or pan-experientialism. Those are just different words for the same thing. It just depends on which one you find more elegant. But there's no difference whatsoever. It's the same position.
Seems like this is a question that'll come up later in the day, but like taking God as an actual occasion or something higher than us.
Yeah.
And something like a cell. Is that just an emphasis of like more mental, less physical, like more transparency?
The model that I'm presenting here implies a kind of infinite hierarchy of actual occasions of higher and higher grade, right? So in a certain sense, the whole universe becomes a sequence of actual occasions in some way. God is something else. And I'm really deliberately bracketing out the theological questions in this particular weekend, just because it's just a whole other discourse, right? We'd have to approach it in a very different way.
So maybe taking God out of it and just some actual occasion that's ordering me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm associating myself with something, and there's something higher in the hierarchy.
Yes.
Can't I become aware of myself as something higher in that hierarchy? Or am I sort of, where do I stop?
That's a really interesting question. The way I'm presenting it today is that we are just at the level we're at. We are just these actual occasions that exist moment to moment. And so we would be influenced by the aim of the higher grade occasions. But the model I'm presenting today doesn't provide for what you're talking about. That question you're asking is very closely related to the question of reincarnation. Because the question, there are different ways to understand reincarnation. Right? It could just be a sequence of actual occasions that jumps across lifetimes. Or it might be that we are part of a soul, and that this soul is somehow other than our personality. And if we are part of a soul, which is somehow connected with the universe and connected with the transcendent, then indeed there are all these yogic possibilities of our own transcendence, which I definitely think and believe, right? But as I said, for this weekend, I'm just not going there because I'm just trying to cover this particular piece of the territory. Maybe we can do another weekend sometime and talk about the theology, because it's really important and really interesting and has huge implications. But I'm just trying to bracket it out because there's so much to cover this weekend.
Is that theology necessarily a limitation in understanding transcendence, even in the terms that I understand you saying? In other words, becoming aware of yourself on a more complex or higher grade level isn't necessarily theological. Doesn't need God in there to expand awareness to recognize a higher transcendent state.
Let me say this. The model that I'm presenting is not adequate to deal with the possibility of transcendence in that way. I'm talking at the level of the personality. I'm not talking at the level of the soul. Right? So the soul, I would say, is that element in us which is a divine spark, basically, and which has the capacity to experience ourselves universally and transcendently. But I'm talking about the personality, which is a personally ordered sequence of high-grade actual occasions. Now, that personality is just what it is, and it's not going to transcend. But we are more than that. But I'm not talking about that part of us this weekend, right? And so it just requires different conceptual resources. Now, if you don't like God, we could maybe find a different word for it, but it does require something bigger. See, I like God too, yeah, so I think we do that if we're going to, we're talking about this weekend at a very particular level, right? The objective is to find a metaphysical framework which is compatible with science, but allows us to discuss self-organization, evolutionary emergence, parapsychology, reincarnation, and life after death. And I'm doing the minimum I can to encompass that, which is not very minimal, but it's still less than I could do, right? But then if we want to go deeper and broader and discuss possibilities of enlightenment and possibilities of yoga and discuss the actual origin of actual occasions and so forth, then we have to step back into a bigger picture and approach it in a different way, which I'd love to do on another occasion, but not this weekend.
So does at the level of the personality, I can recognize myself as an individual human sitting here in this skin on this couch.
Right.
I can also recognize myself as a member of this community.
Right. That's right.
I can also recognize myself as part of any other affiliation.
That's right.
Part of a club or
Right.
some other professional organization. Or I could recognize myself as a part of the human species.
Exactly.
So is that level of personality recognition within this model?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's tricky working with conceptual models, right? And I'm presenting a set of abstractions, and as I said last night, every set of abstractions is germane to a certain set of interests, right? So I'm presenting a set of abstractions germane to these particular interests, which are also the ones that are relevant to the survival group at Esalen. So it's not just here, right? So, but it's interesting, right? And then another occasion we'll take a broader view and approach it with a more spiritual interest. And then we'll see that there's another set of abstractions very closely related to this, but somewhat different, which open up to the larger existential situation.